Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to speak in the chamber, and not just in front of you, but against you. It's an honor I didn't know I would be having. And while I really want to do my side justice, I also hope I won't get into your bad books too much if I am persuasive, and that we will maintain our relationship in the healthy way it has been so far. It's also an honor to speak alongside our guest speakers, who so far have argued a great side of the case. Not to mention, in a chamber where my own parents aren't here to heckle me, which is what happened the last time I spoke in this chamber. So thank you for the sound technicians for ensuring they can't do that. The proposition have put forth their case for the mistakes of the past. To a great extent, I agree with them. The misadministration of countries and regions under colonialism and in the immediate following years led to dire financial situations, the uprooting of culture, general upheaval and distress, after which the perpetrators ran back to their own countries. At the time, the lending from colonizing nations did do little more than add to the problem of debt, to people struggling to rebuild their identity and their infrastructure. These are my key points. Modern lending is less harmful and more considered. We now have institutions to vet lending. The real cause, the root cause of this plight is the destabilizing influence of colonialism and its ripple effects through the years. Crucially, this is not the fault of foreign lenders, but it is the fault of Western nations and a burden they must bear for the rest of time. Now, standing here as a classicist, I appreciate I am in better company with a lawyer, a PPEist, and excellent guest speakers. But I do know ancient history. If you cast your minds back briefly to 80 BC, the dictator Sulla had just returned from an expedition. He brought with him the prescription orders to take money and goods from wealthy men in Rome and assign them to his veterans. Hence, the veterans were given great wealth, but they weren't knowledgeable about what to do with it. I'm not comparing these two scenarios, but in this instance, they weren't knowledgeable what to do with it. Catiline came along and promised them to erase their debts. This was the Catilinarian conspiracy, and it led to upheaval and uproar until Cicero came with a better solution, with a political way to evade the debts by selling men's estates, which was not popular, but it did temporarily fix the problem until the Roman Republic completely fell apart. We'll see how that goes. The proposition has been heavily focused on the history of lending, but although I might be tempted, it's not a fair way to present this motion. The ramifications of the mistakes are still felt, but foreign lending now is more sympathetic and has already lightened the burden on struggling countries without imposing too significant a debt. It's critical to really set out the state of foreign lending today. Western lenders, in fact, are hardly relevant. As the first proposition speaker had said so wisely, China is the largest lender by a massive, massive margin. The World Bank, the EU, the US are dwarfed by China's massive contributions. It outspends the UK on a 7-to-1 basis and spends an estimated $85 billion per year on loans alone. The World Bank, the IMF, the Paris Club creditors, China's loans are larger than all of these combined. When we speak of lending nowadays on a global scale, we speak of China. These loans are diverse, but 90% of the money China provides is non-concessional. That means it will be paid back with interest over a fixed period. The remaining 10% are more like grants, but go mostly to political allies. But we're here to talk of non-concessional loans, loans that accrue debt. A feature of China's lending is that it's fast and easy, hence the enormous amount of money they are able to lend. With a 4% interest rate over 10 years, on average, compared to the OECD average of 1% interest over 28 years, China's loans are paid back faster, on average, and with more support to ensure the investment is paid back. That might be a controversial statement, but loaning from China is a short-term investment heavily focused on lucrative industry. One of China's largest investments is Angola.
Point of order. Could you please speak slightly louder?
One of China's largest investments is in Angola, a small African nation rich in oil. Money from these non-concessional loans goes into oil refineries, gas pipelines, and infrastructure to maintain them, thus helping Angola make profit from its natural resources in selling oil. The money from any of these non-concessional loans, which ensures the loans are paid back, they're paid back quickly, and the investment feeds into the economy of a developing nation. In fact, the African Development Bank projects by the end of this year, Angola's GDP will have increased 2.9%, with inflation falling at the same time due to their impressive oil industry aided by China. I should stress that as well as financing oil, China is also the largest domestic and outbound investor in renewable energy, and as of early 2017, owns 5 of the world's 6 largest solar panel manufacturing companies in the world. That's according to the World Resources Institute. These are among the concessional loans that China has invested in for both personal profit, non-concessional loans, for both personal profit, when green energy hopefully becomes the primary source of all power, and with the benefit of supporting the nations they invest in. China's Exim Bank has focused its loans on national infrastructure, highways, railways, bridges, and airports. These loans, of course, have to be paid back, but are a crucial hand-up in enabling a developing country to engage in international trade, cultivate its tourism market, and become a globalized nation, which brings wealth. This is the face of modern lending, and it's assisting in fixing issues from the past. In this way, lending is more careful. China lends with close attention to whether money will be returned, and does it with short-term investments. But the IMF and the World Bank exist to promote global financial security and do administer emergency loans, but also assist in paying them back. In recent months, the IMF has been heavily involved with Pakistan following the terrible flooding across the nation. They were recently granted £1 billion in loans to support the efforts. I know people personally who have made incredible efforts in Pakistan and have seen firsthand what's happened. As such, they will have seen the need to rebuild, to fortify flood defences, to provide aid to those who've lost their homes is dire. In this instance, although it isn't clear when those loans will be paid back, it's saved lives to have an overarching body to lend money when it's necessary. Lending is a bailout, which is simply critical in the case of disasters and tragedies like these. To the proposition, I say that it's a gross oversimplification and straw man argument to blame lenders for the plight of developing countries. Instead, we must look at the root cause and blame that. I believe in most cases, this is the destabilizing, ravaging, and ruin of nations colonized by the West. A friend of mine is from Algeria, and when I asked her for her opinion on this debate, she told me that nobody had harmed her country more than France, certainly not any lending programs. After the Second World War, when faced with the necessity of decolonization, France acted inhumanely. In 1945, demonstrations celebrating the end of the war were put down with excessive force, killing an estimated 6,000 to 8,000 people in one movement, Algerian Muslims following one parade of 5,000 people. In the Algerian War of Independence, which lasted until 1962, some estimates say 1/10 of the population was killed. This was a colonial conflict stained with torture, crimes against humanity, and horrors, and it's inflicted generational trauma. With Algeria in debt relative to around 70% of its GDP, and a GDP 19 times smaller than the UK, this presents a real problem. Those Algerians who fought with the French are still not welcome in the country and instead live in small communities in France. There was outrage when it was announced that the French curriculum was adding a unit about the positive role of the French overseas, especially in North Africa. Any investment involved in colonial activity is not, in fact, lending. They are bonds of colonialism and shouldn't factor into this argument. I hardly need to mention the example of Rwanda, where racial divides put in place by Belgian colonists led to the horrific Rwandan genocide after the country was freed. Although Rwanda has seen growing prosperity in recent years, the deaths from this conflict have undeniably hindered the country. So many people were lost, and so much grief was felt. The same happened in the Belgian Congo, where racial divides the Belgians had created led to later civil wars and conflict, unthinkable without the evils of colonialism that had preceded them. Further, as the colonists left, they stripped nations of resources they'd long made use of. The power vacuums left in the place of colonialism lay open to those who would exploit them, just as they have done in every nation globally as it becomes more prosperous. The Western lenders in the years following were, for the most part, not trying to exploit struggling people. They were trying to aid them at a time when they too were struggling from the ramifications of 2 world wars. Although the loans have historically hampered some governance, it's not the debt that's left developing countries in trouble. It's the Western colonialism that created internal division, lack of infrastructure and industry, and generational trauma. In terms of debt, the UK itself, according to the Office for National Statistics, is in debt of $2,100 billion. Just let that sink in, 2,000 billion. And I'm sure you all agree, we're doing great. Jokes aside, national debt is a fact and it does handicap a government. We've seen it affect ours. But to blame lending and debt for the plight of developing countries entirely is incorrect. It's the destabilizing influence of colonialism, the power vacuums left behind, the racial divides it created, the cruelty of decolonization that's impacted developing countries the most. I urge you to trust the knowledge of our financial institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, to slowly mitigate the damage done. I urge you to see beyond the handicap of foreign debt and lending to the true cause. I urge you tonight to look ahead and not behind, with hope that the institutions we've put in place are there to help us. And I urge you to vote for the opposition. Thank you.